Hey everybody, this is Josh from Hidden Library Leatherworks. In this video, we're going to walk through some of the tools that you can use to take your leatherworking to the next level. Let's get to it. If you haven't already seen my basic leatherworking tools video, go ahead and hit the link in the upper corner here. In this video, we're going to walk through some of the tools that you can use for minimal investment to really add some polish to your final product. The first tool I want to talk about is a very simple tool. It should be, in my opinion, in every leatherworker's toolkit. This is called a modeling spoon. As you'll see, it actually has two separate ends on it. In one, you have a stylus that is very helpful for when you're tooling and carving and marking leather, marking measurement points, things of that nature. And on the other end, this is very helpful for shaping, tooling, and carving. You have a sort of curved spoon end. You can pick these up for very inexpensively from Tandy Leather, Amazon, Springfield Leather, even Hobby Lobby and Michaels and things like that will have this. This is very handy, and I highly recommend that you pick one of these up. The number one thing that you can do to add professionalism and polish to your leatherworking projects is to make sure that you have clean edges. There are a couple of different tools that will help you to achieve this. The first one is going to be edge bevelers. I have a couple different sizes here. Essentially what these are is a channeled knife that allows you to run along the corner of the leather and bevel out that edge. It's really going to help to get you a professional finished edge, especially when you combine that with edge burnishing, which we're going to talk about just shortly. A wider blade is used for thicker leather and a narrower blade is used for thinner leather. I find that the number 2 and number 3 really accomplishes most of what I need with the leather weights that I use. I use the number 3, which is the wider blade on most of my armor grade leather, and then on thinner leather, I use the number 2. I'll have another video coming up later where we talk about how to use a lot of these tools. After you've gone through and used the edge beveler on your leather, you're going to want to do what's known as burnishing the leather. This is essentially taking a tool and applying heat and friction, as well as usually some sort of compound like gum tragacanth or beeswax, in order to slick down the fibers on the leather. This gives you that nice, smooth, polished edge on your leather. There are a number of different tools that you can use to do this. In fact, some as simple as just a simple piece of canvas that you run across with your finger. I prefer this particular tool here, which is a wooden edge beveler. These can be found very inexpensively. They have a number of different size grooves here for different weights of leather, and can also be used to help shape and mold leather when you're doing the wet molding process. This is actually a very useful multitasker, and I use this very heavily in my shop. If you've watched my video on how to make a basic leather bracer, you'll note that I used a square and a razor blade to cut those straps. Fortunately, there is a much easier way. This is a very simple leather tool made out of wood that has two pieces running together that hold a razor blade captive and has markings along the side for measurements. You can adjust how wide you want your straps to be via the thumb screw up here, and you simply put your leather in and draw it through, and you can very quickly make out your straps. However, I find oftentimes that the strength and durability of that tool is not necessarily up to snuff, so what I really recommend, if you can afford it, is what's called a draw gauge. Now this tool is at least 2 or 3 times as expensive, but you'll see it has an ergonomic grip here. It is fully metal, and it has a much stouter and sharper blade. Of course, there are replacement blades, but just like the strap cutter, you have a scale here that shows you the size. But this will actually, in fact, cut leather grade armor, whereas the strap cutter will only cut up to about 6 to 7 ounce leather. Next up, if you're planning on doing any sort of stitching or even really decorative edging, I highly recommend buying an edge groover. There are a couple different styles. Your basic inexpensive style has a shaft that runs down the middle, which acts as a guide that you run alongside the leather. This piece here, which actually makes the groove, is adjustable, and you can adjust in and measure out how far in you would like that stitching groove or decorative groove to go. I find, however, what I like to use is the more advanced version, which they call a center groover. So rather than the center shaft being your guide, you have the cutter on the center, and you can adjust the guide outside on the edge. I find that this gives me a much more even and predictable cut and is a lot easier to work with. It is a little bit more expensive, so keep that in mind. I will say that I did use this for many years with great success, so you certainly don't have to go for the more expensive model right out the gate. Next up, we need to talk about skiving leather. Skiving is the process of essentially taking a piece of leather and thinning it out. So this can be useful if you are making straps or if you're making complex pieces where you have a number of different layers and you don't want it to appear too bulky. There are a number of different options for skiving leather out. I have just a couple of them here. I have Craft Tools Super Skiver, which I prefer to use. Essentially, there is a razor blade in here, and you just drag this across the leather, and it will shave off very thin sections. There's also the cheaper option, which is the Safety Skiver, which is a little bit curved, as you can see, and this will essentially perform the same function. Now, depending on what you're doing, there are also other options. The highest end option would typically be called a French skiver, which you can think of very similar to like a chisel. So that requires, of course, more skill as you are, there's nothing preventing you from just cutting straight through the leather. But that is an option as well if that's something that you're looking to go for. Now, finally, I want to talk about a couple different punch options. I've mentioned this in some other videos before. If you're making a lot of straps or belts, things like that, you may want to invest in some strap end cutters. What I have here is an English point strap cutter. This is for a 1.5 inch strap. I actually find myself making a lot of belts, so this is perfect for that. That does not mean that it can't be used for smaller straps. As a matter of fact, I use this for almost all my straps, even down all the way to 5/8 of an inch thick. This lets you get a very clean edge on your straps very, very quickly. And finally, I'd like to talk about what's called an oblong punch. An oblong punch is, just as the name implies, a punch that rather than being circular, like the hole punch that we discussed before, simply gives you an oblong end. This is typically what I use when I'm cutting holes for the tongue of buckles to go through. It can also be useful for a number of other things when you're making armor, such as if you want a floating rivet for articulation or things like that, you can use these punches. There are a number of them. They do come in different sizes and qualities. This is the basic one. This is a basic 3/4 inch oblong punch. They actually make much more expensive ones, but I found that this basic one works pretty well for me. So that'll do it for our basic leatherworking tools guide. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And of course, as always, if you'd like to see more leatherworking tools, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks.